The moment I saw her hand on his arm, I stopped walking. My daughter kept going, pulling her little rolling suitcase down the hotel corridor, chattering about how she wanted to swim in the pool before dinner. She didn't see what I saw. I made sure of it. I called her name, softly, the way you do when you don't want to startle anyone, and she turned around, with that gap-toothed smile she'd had since she lost her front tooth in October. "Mummy, come on," she said. "Daddy's probably already waiting." He was, just not for us. I need to back up because this story doesn't start in a hotel hallway in downtown Calgary. It starts 6 months earlier, in our kitchen in Oakville, on a Tuesday night when my husband came home 2 hours late and told me his division's quarterly review had run long. I believed him. I made him a plate of the shepherd's pie I'd kept warm in the oven, and I sat across from him while he ate it, and I told him about Phoebe's parent-teacher conference and how Ms. Renwick said she was reading at a grade 3 level, even though she'd just started grade 2. He nodded and smiled and said, "That's our girl," and then he went upstairs to shower. I was 37 years old. I had a 7-year-old daughter, a mortgage on a semi-detached in Oakville, a part-time bookkeeping contract with a small architecture firm in Mississauga, and a husband who was, by every external measure, a good man. He coached her soccer on Saturday mornings. He cleared the driveway without being asked. He brought me coffee before I woke up. I should say his name, I suppose, because it matters. People always want to know the name, as though it explains something. His name is Everett. And the woman whose hand was on his arm in that hotel hallway, 3 days before Christmas, while our daughter dragged her suitcase toward him, her name was Simone. She worked in his firm's Vancouver office. She had been, for approximately 14 months, the reason my husband's quarterly reviews kept running long. I didn't find this out in the hallway. I want to be clear about that. By the time I saw them together, I already knew everything. I had known for 11 days. The knowing part, that was its own story, one that had happened quietly, in the middle of a Wednesday afternoon, when I was sitting at my laptop doing invoices and a message notification appeared on his iPad, which was synced to his account and sitting on the kitchen counter because he'd forgotten it at home. I did not mean to read it. The screen lit up with just enough preview text that I couldn't unsee it. After that, I put the iPad face down on the counter, and I finished the invoices. Then I went to pick Phoebe up from school. I held her hand all the way home and I listened to her tell me about the Christmas craft they were making. A paper snowflake mobile. And I did not cry until she was asleep. 11 days. That's how long I had between reading that message and standing in that hotel hallway in Calgary. And I want to tell you what I did with those 11 days, because this is the part people don't expect. I called my older brother, Lachlan. He's the steadiest person I know, works in commercial real estate in Toronto, the kind of man who speaks slowly and means every word. I told him everything. There was a long silence on the phone and then he said, "Okay, before you do anything, let me make a few calls." He didn't ask me how I felt. He already knew. We're not a family that asks questions we know the answer to. What he meant by a few calls, I understood immediately. Our father had built a mid-sized property development company over 40 years, and when he retired, he split it 3 ways between Lachlan, our younger brother Warren, and himself, with the intention of eventually passing Warren's share to me since I had no interest in running it myself, but wanted some stake in something our family had built. Everett's firm, the architecture firm where he was a senior project manager, had over the past 4 years received 3 significant contracts through my family's connections, not because I demanded it, because Lachlan had liked his work and trusted him. That trust was worth roughly $2.3 million in billings. I tell you this not to sound cold. I tell you this because you need to understand what it meant when Lachlan said he was making calls. I spent those 11 days doing 2 things. I smiled at Everett at breakfast, and I kissed Phoebe goodbye at school, and I kept my voice steady. And in the hours in between, I sat in a coffee shop on Lakeshore Road with my laptop and a flat white, and I built myself a future that did not include him. We had planned the Calgary trip for months. Everett's firm had a project there, a mixed-use development near the East Village, and he'd suggested we come for the week before Christmas, make it a family holiday. Phoebe had never seen the Rockies. She'd been talking about Banff since September, cutting pictures of elk out of a magazine and sticking them in her school journal. I agreed to the trip. I booked us on the same flight. I did not mention that I had also called a family lawyer named Mr. Tate, who had spent 35 years practicing family law in Hamilton and who had a very calm voice that made terrible information feel manageable. Everett was already checked in when we arrived. He texted me from the hotel bar to say he'd had an early meeting run long. That phrase again, and he'd meet us upstairs in about an hour. I told him we'd come find him. He said there was no need. I said, "Don't be silly, Phoebe wants to see you." That's when we turned the corner in the hallway outside the bar. and I saw him. He was standing with his back, mostly to us, and she was beside him, and her hand was resting on the inside side of his forearm in the way that you do when you are comfortable with someone's body. Not beside them. Inside the space of them. I said, Phoebe's name. She turned around. I said we should check in first. Go up and put our bags in the room. That I'd seen a vending machine by the elevator with those chips she liked. She immediately forgot her father existed. 7-year-olds are blessedly distractible. We went upstairs. I ran her a bath and ordered her a grilled cheese from room service. I sat on the edge of the tub while she played with the small rubber duck she'd packed in her suitcase for emergencies, and I thought, I am not going to fall apart in front of my daughter. That is the only thing I am absolutely certain of right now. Everett came up 45 minutes later. He smelled like bar soap. He'd washed his hands, I noticed, before touching Phoebe, who launched herself at him from the bathroom doorway in her pajamas. He swung her up and she said, Daddy, we're going to see elk tomorrow, and he said, Are we? And looked at me over her head with a smile that was so normal, so completely ordinary, that I had a moment, just one, where I wondered if I had imagined everything. I hadn't. I smiled back. I said I was tired from the flight and was going to turn in early. He said he had to go back down for a working dinner with colleagues from the Vancouver office. Of course he did. Of course, I said. Don't wake us when you come in. He didn't come back to the room until past midnight. The next morning, I took Phoebe to Banff on the shuttle bus, while Everett went to his site visit. She wore her purple parka and we saw 3 elk near the river, and she screamed with delight so loud that the couple next to us burst out laughing. We ate beaver tails near the gondola and I took about 100 photos of her with powdered sugar on her nose. It was, genuinely, a beautiful day. That's the complicated part of this whole story that I don't know how to make simple. That there were real things, good things, layered on top of the rot, and you couldn't just pull one out without disturbing the other. That night, after Phoebe was asleep, Everett poured us each a glass of wine from the minibar and sat on the end of the bed and said he had something he needed to tell me. I already knew what it was, of course, but I let him talk. He said it had been going on since the spring. He said it had started when he was in Vancouver for a 4-week project and that it wasn't. He used this word, serious, which is a word men say when they mean they haven't yet decided if they're willing to lose their current life. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't know what he wanted. He said Phoebe was the most important thing to him. I sat very still. I had rehearsed this moment in the coffee shop on Lakeshore Road until I knew what I was going to say. I know, I said. I've known for 11 days. He stared at me. I also know, I said, that her firm has been approached twice this year about contracts with federal departments that would require security clearance and partnership with licensed Canadian architecture firms. I know that your firm was recommended for one of those reviews because Lachlan put your name forward. I paused. I called Lachlan 2 weeks ago. Everett's face changed in a way I will never entirely be able to describe. It wasn't anger, it was the specific expression of a person realizing the ground has already shifted and they were the last to notice. I'm not asking you to beg, I said. I'm not interested in a conversation about what you want. I have spoken to Mr. Tate, who has drafted an initial proposal that I think is very fair. Phoebe stays in Oakville, primary residence with me. You have her every second weekend and 2 weeks in the summer, which is standard and honestly more than some fathers get. I kept my voice even. The house goes on the market in the spring. We split the equity after the legal fees. I'll take my car and the contents of the joint savings account, which I've been managing anyway. He said my name. Just my name, like a question. Lachlan's firm is reviewing its contracts with yours in January, I said. That's not a threat. That's just what happens when business relationships are built on personal trust, and that trust is broken. He made that decision himself. I didn't ask him to. The wine sat untouched between us on the nightstand. What do you want me to do? Everett said finally. Tonight, I want you to sleep on the pull-out sofa. I stood up. Tomorrow I want you to take Phoebe to see the ice castle she saw in the brochure at the front desk, because I promised her someone would, and I have a call with Mr. Tate at 11. And when we get home to Oakville, I want you to start looking for somewhere to stay, because I am not leaving my daughter's school and her friends and everything she knows because you couldn't manage your own decisions. He didn't argue. That surprised me somewhere under the numbness, the fact that he didn't argue. I think he had been waiting in some way to be caught. Some people need the thing to collapse before they can move. He made up the pull-out sofa himself without asking where the extra blankets were. I lay in the dark on my side of the king bed and I listened to the sounds of the hotel, the hum of the ventilation, someone's television down the hall, Phoebe's soft breathing from the rollaway by the window, and I thought, I built this badly. Not the marriage, maybe. The foundation of my own life. I had let myself become load-bearing in someone else's structure without building anything independently that could hold weight. I thought about Phoebe's face with powdered sugar on her nose. I thought, I'm going to be okay. The next 2 months were not, if I'm honest, okay. They were the kind of months where you get up because your daughter has school, and you make lunches because she needs them. And you smile at the other parents at pickup, and then you come home, and the house is too quiet, and you stand in the kitchen, and sometimes you just put your forehead against the cold cabinet door and breathe. There were nights I called Lachlan just to talk. There were nights I didn't call anyone and watched British baking shows until 2 in the morning. There were 3 separate occasions when Phoebe asked when at Groden Lake home and I said, Daddy has his own home now, remember? And watched her process this. And the processing was the hardest thing I have ever witnessed. She asked me one Saturday in February whether Daddy had left because of her. I got down on my knees on our kitchen floor so I was at her level, and I held both her hands and I said no. I said her dad and I had both made mistakes and that none of it, not one single piece, was because of her. I said she was the best thing either of us had ever done. She said okay in the considering way she had, and then she said she wanted to make pancakes. We made pancakes. She put in too many chocolate chips and we ate them anyway. That spring, the house sold in 11 days, which felt, in the grim accounting of my year, like a cosmic joke, for $64,000 over asking. My share, after the legal fees and the mortgage payout, was enough to put a solid down payment on a 3-bedroom semi in a neighborhood 1 postal code over. Close enough that Phoebe didn't have to change schools. I negotiated my bookkeeping contract to full-time. I hired a neighbor's teenager to walk Phoebe home on the days I had afternoon calls. Everett and Simone did not last. I found this out not from him, but from a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it in passing at a school function in April, with the slightly apologetic tone people use when they're not sure if the information is helpful or hurtful. I said, oh, I hadn't heard, and I genuinely did not feel the thing I expected to feel, which was satisfaction. I just felt tired. Tired in the way that told me I was actually finally healing. What I hadn't told Everett, and what I still haven't told anyone except Lachlan, was that the review of his firm's contracts wasn't just a loss of existing work. One of those federal partnerships, the one Lachlan had recommended them for, would have been the largest single contract in the firm's history. The kind of contract that redefines a business. His firm's senior partners eventually traced the withdrawal back through the chain of referrals and understood, without anyone having to say it directly, what had happened. Everett was moved off the partnership track in March. I didn't plan any of that. I want to be honest about that. I made one phone call to my brother. Everything else was a consequence that Everett had set in motion himself, months before I even knew to be afraid. There's a thing people say about revenge, about how it's hollow, about how you're supposed to feel empty after. I don't think that's entirely true. I think there's a particular kind of justice that isn't about punishment. It's about re-establishing the true weight of things, making sure the accounting is accurate. Everett had built part of his professional life on the weight of my family's name. When he stopped earning that, the weight went away. That isn't hollow. That's just math. What's hollow is something else. It's the Tuesday evenings when Phoebe is at his apartment, and the house is so quiet it has a sound to it. A specific frequency of silence I have had to learn to sit with. It's looking at photos from the Calgary trip, and seeing Phoebe's face at the Elk, and knowing that joy was real even when everything around it wasn't. It's the occasional moment, usually when I'm most tired, when I miss not him specifically but the idea of someone. Someone in the kitchen when I get home, someone who knows what time the recycling goes out. But I'm also 37 years old, which turns out to be not the end of anything. Last September, I started a small business. Just me, working from the 2nd bedroom I'd set up as an office, doing bookkeeping and financial management for 4 small businesses in the region. By November, it was 6. By February, 8. Nothing dramatic. Just work and the specific dignity of building something that belongs entirely to you. Phoebe turned 8 in March. We had the party at the community center and Lachlan drove down from Toronto and wore a paper crown without being asked. Which is one of those things you love someone for. She blew out her candles and we sang off key, and afterwards she fell asleep in the car on the way home, her cheek against the window, the paper crown still slightly crooked on her head. I carried her inside. I tucked her in. I stood in the doorway of her room for a moment in the dark. She was fine. She was going to be fine. And so I had finally started to believe was I.